So the people of Israel have demanded a king. They have had, or at least some of them have, they have had enough of their... As soon as I start the video, this cat comes down to start causing... I mean, literally, as soon... She'd been sitting over there. She'd been sitting over there peacefully and quietly for 15 minutes. And as soon as I start talking, turn the camera on and start talking, here she comes. She has been trying since the beginning to knock this camera off the table. To bat around this camera and destroy it. That's just, oh my goodness, does she want to do that? Yeah, I'm looking at you. I can read your intentions on your face, you wicked cat. Anyway, the people of Israel have, at least some of them, have insisted on a king. They have had enough of this tribal confederacy they belong to, this state of anarchy that they have existed in now for 400-ish years since they came out of Egypt and settled the land, where they would basically go off and all do their own thing, and every so often God would send a judge to raise up a judge and send that person over them. They're tired of that. They want a king, and they want to be like the nations around them. Specifically, the problem here is they want to be like the nations around them. God was supposed to be their king, but they did not in the end want God to be their king. Yes, they want a king like the nations around them, and they think that they can get this king to do things for them. They have two fundamentally mistaken beliefs about this. One is that they want to be like the nations around them, and two is they think that the king is going to work for them, and they're not going to work for the king. And that's not how it works. That's not how kingdoms work. That's not how kingships work. That's not how human governments work, period. In the end, the people will end up working for the government. The government will not work for the people. That is just not how it works. It's not how it's ever worked, and it's not how it's ever going to work. And we're seeing that even play out in our culture today, in our country today, as we're changing around our own long-standing beliefs of the government working for the people, and now we have to work for the government. That's just how it always ends up coming down to with humans. But Samuel was hurt by this. Samuel saw this as a rejection of him. I'm assuming Samuel wanted his sons to be his successors, and they were wicked. I don't know if they were more or less wicked than Eli's sons, the guy before him, I don't know. But they were wicked. So people didn't want Samuel's sons, at least two of them. I don't know if he had more or not, but the two that we read about were wicked, and the people didn't want them as sons. Samuel seems to have limited their influence by sending them down far to the south of Israel, possibly because down there they would have less influence. I don't know. But they're wicked. The people don't want them to be Samuel's successor. Samuel doesn't have another successor. So he sees this as a personal rejection of himself, and God tells him not to see it that way, but that it's a rejection of God as the king of the Israelites. And God has agreed to give the people the king that they want. And there was a provision in the law back in Deuteronomy 17 for this to happen someday. So they always knew that the people would eventually want a king. So now we got to find this guy. We got to find this guy. God has told Samuel that he's going to anoint a king. He's going to send someone to send someone to Samuel that God has chosen to be the king of the Israelites. Who's that guy going to be? 1 Samuel, starting in chapter 9. There was a Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah of Benjamin. I know that this genealogy doesn't mean much to me, okay? The only thing this genealogy, two things really. The two things this genealogy means to me is that A, Saul was a Benjamite, and two, apparently his family history was fairly impressive because they go back. I mean, this is Kish, it's going to be Kish's son Saul who ends up being king. So we go from Kish, Saul's father, to Abiel, to Zeror, to Becherath, to Aphiah. So we go back 5 generations. Typically, in these genealogies, when we are introduced to a character in these stories, even a prophet, when a prophet comes along and introduces himself, typically, the farther back they go with their genealogies as they introduce themselves, the more prestigious their family is. So for this to go back 5 generations to, Saul's dad's dad, whatever, 5 generations back, means that it must have been a pretty prominent. Now that means nothing to us today, okay? These family records of the Israelites, of the Benjamin, are long. It meant everything to these people, okay? This was their life. This was their form of immortality. I didn't say that before. This was their form of immortality. At this point in time, they still didn't have any way that they knew of that they were going to live forever. So they lived their names lived forever through having lots of sons and having lots of generations after them. So whenever a character is introduced, it's just a general principle that we're going to be seeing here from the rest of the Old Testament narratives, and even in the prophets, that when a character comes along and introduces himself, when the text introduces him, the farther back in his genealogy they go, typically the more prominent his family is. But again, that means almost nothing to us today, because there are no Benjamites today. It's like it's like to us it means almost nothing, but to them it meant everything. So Kish had a son named Saul, an impressive young man without equal amongst the Israelites, a head taller than any of the others. Now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father Kish were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, "Take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys." I don't know how these donkeys got off. They just wandered off. I don't know. But at any rate, they're lost. So he passed through. Oh no. What are you doing, cat? Go on with that. Cat, leave that alone. Yeah, I'll clean that. That's just a speck of dust. There's a dust ball that's kind of accumulated in the top corner of the room near the ceiling up there, and all of a sudden Timber decides she wants to get it. I mean, that's been there for weeks. I haven't done any sweeping back here lately. I should. So it's been there for days and days and days, but Timber just now all of a sudden decides she wants to do something about it. Anyway, so Saul passed through the hill country of Ephraim and through the area around Shalisha, but he did not find them. They, Saul and his servant, went out into the district of Shalom, but the donkeys were not there. Then he passed to the territory of Benjamin, but they did not find them. These are pretty well-hidden donkeys. When they reached the desert of Zuph, Saul said to the servant who was with him, "Come, let's go back, or my father will stop thinking about the donkeys and start worrying about us." They didn't have cell phones back in those days. They couldn't just call and say how they were doing. But the servant replied, "Look, in this town there is a man of God. He is highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let us go there now. Perhaps he will be able to tell us what way to take." Saul said to the servant, "If we go, what can we give this man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have?" The servant answered him again. "Look," he said, "I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. That is about a tenth of an ounce, or 3 grams, according to my footnote down there. I will give it to the man of God, so that he will tell us which way to take. Formerly in Israel," this is an author's note to explain something to the readers, or his hearers actually. "Formerly in Israel, if a man went to inquire of God, he would say, 'Come, let us go to the seer,' because the prophet of today used to be called a seer." From the time of Samuel, actually when Saul becomes king and Samuel as the prophet anoints him, from that point onward the office of the prophet changes, and the prophet becomes like an official statesman in the court of the king, speaking God's message to the king. Until then, before they had a king where that was necessary, apparently they would have these local seers, these men of God who we saw one come to Eli back in chapter 2. Didn't get that guy's name though. Apparently there would be these local seers who would be located in certain towns or villages and maybe have a sphere of influence. Maybe a town, maybe a series of towns. Samuel had a circuit that he traveled. And these local seers would explain the will of God to the people who came to inquire of him. And that apparently was how it was going from the time they got to the land until basically the days of Samuel and Saul. And then when the kingship was established, the prophet took on more official duties as a spokesman of God for the king, in the face of the king. Good, Saul said to his servant. So whoever wrote this down, and whatever time period that line was written in, is at some point in time later, after the office of the prophet had changed, and the writer felt it necessary to explain to his then contemporary audience what the difference used to be between the prophets as they knew them and the seers of centuries past. Good, Saul said to his servant. Come, let's go. So they set out for the town where the man of God was. As they were going up the hill to the town, they met some girls coming out to draw water, because that was typically a female responsibility, and it was a social event for them. And they asked them, "Is the seer here?" "He is," they answered. "He's ahead of you. Hurry now. He has just come to our town today, for the people have been sacrificed at the high place. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat." The high place, we're going to see this term high place a lot in the rest of the Old Testament narratives. From what I understand, and it's a little ambiguous, because the texts never really explain what these high places were. They just assume their hearers at the time knew them. Because they would have, When the priests are reading these texts out loud, after they've been written by the prophets or whoever, the people that day would know what the high places were, because they were familiar with that. So they don't ever really explain what the high places are, because they don't need to. They already know. From what I can tell, a high place is basically an altar or shrine or some sort of worship site that was erected literally on a high place, at the top of a hill or something like that. And as we've been seeing since the very, 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 very beginning, it was ubiquitous in the ancient world that to get to God, to worship your gods properly, you had to climb a mountain. Like the higher you got, the closer to God you got. God was generally believed as dwelling above in the skies or even beyond the skies. And so it was just, and so their temples and their shrines and their altars were usually built on top of hills. And the Israelites did that. Everybody did that. Like, it was just a constant, common theme throughout the ancient world that to get close to God, you had to go as high as you could. You had to get on top of a mountain or climb the highest that you could to get to God. So my guess is that these high places that are going to be referred to from here on are hilltop shrines or altars or some sort of worship site that was built literally on a high place. Remember, they don't have a tabernacle right now. Israel does not have a functioning priesthood at this point in time. We saw that the ark was taken out of Shiloh to go fight the Philistines and was captured. We don't hear about Shiloh again. It's my belief that probably Shiloh was taken by the Philistines shortly after that. At the very least, it seems to have been abandoned and was never reestablished as a worship site. The ark was not brought back there after they got it back. They didn't really recapture it. They just had it brought back to them. And so Shiloh seems to be abandoned. The Ark of the Covenant is still in the Kiryat Jearim in somebody's house. They don't have a functioning priesthood. The previous high priest died. They haven't apparently installed another one, at least I can tell. So it's still kind of every man for himself. Samuel is not even really a priest. Samuel is not of the proper priestly line. But he seems to be functioning as a priest during this time of chaos. Apparently with God's backing and authority. Because no one, and not even the text, not even the writer of the text, no one is criticizing him or rebuking him for it. So at any rate, it is still basically every man for himself. Maybe, so here we go. So as soon as you enter, the girls are still speaking here. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people will not begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Afterward, those who are invited will eat. Go up now. You should find him about this time. They went up to the town, so I'm guessing they're physically going up, because there was a constant mention of going up here, so I'm guessing they're actually climbing a hill or climbing some steps. They're going up a road. They went up to the town, and as they were entering it, there was Samuel coming toward them on his way up to the high place. Now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him leader over my people Israel. He will deliver my people from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked upon my people, for their cry has reached me. When Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, This is the man I spoke to you about. He will govern my people. I don't know how this worked. Was the Lord whispering in Samuel's ear? Did he appear in a vision in front of him while everything else was going on around him? What does that mean? What does it mean that the Lord said to him? I don't know. I don't know what that would have been like. I don't know how that actually happened. Saul approached him, but somehow or another, the Lord audibly confirmed, spoke his word to Samuel that this is the guy he was talking about. This guy right here. This guy who stands a head taller than everybody else. That's the guy the Lord has picked. Exactly how he whispered this message to Samuel or spoke it, I don't know. I can't tell you. Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and asked, Would you please tell me where the seer's house is? I am the seer, Samuel replied. Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you are to eat with me, and in the morning I will let you go, and I will tell you all that is on your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, do not worry about them. They have been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and all your father's family? What is he talking about, huh? First of all, he's given him the answer to the donkey's question already. So whatever is in Saul's heart, that's, by the way, I should mention here before we go any further, they had a different concept of intellect and emotion back in those days than we do today. We hear the word heart, we think of the center of our emotions. This is what we think of love and fear. We think today of our emotions being centered in our heart. Okay, that was not the case back in these days. So when you read about the heart in the Old Testament or the New, they're not talking about your emotions. They're talking about your mind. They thought your heart is where your mind was, is where your thought processes were. To them, they believe the seat of your emotions was in your belly, or in your gut, or in your kidneys, your innards. So when you talk about heart, you're not talking about emotions like you would when we use that word today. Today we talk about heart, we mean it to refer to emotions. They talked about heart in the sense that we would talk about mind, and that's what we're thinking. What are we thinking about? And their emotional center was in their bellies, or in their groins, or down below. And if you think about it, Like when you feel fear, you feel it in your gut. Like when it's like you get that gut feeling of something going on. So that's why they thought that your center of emotions was down in your gut somewhere. And your thought processes were in your heart. So when he's telling Saul, I'm going to tell you what's in your heart, we would see it as I'm going to tell you what's on your mind, what you're thinking about. Now, presumably, Saul was thinking about the donkeys. But Samuel must be referring to something else because he dismisses that immediately. But now he says, who do we desire but you, Saul? And so Saul answers, but am I not a Benjamite? From the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me? He's basically playing the Gideon playbook. That's pretty much what Gideon said to the angel of the Lord back in Judges, huh? Now, Benjamin was a small tribe. Remember, at the time of Judges, they were cut down to only 600 remaining Benjamites. And they had to get wives from the neighboring areas. Which means, after that generation, there would have been no pure-blooded Benjamites from that point forward, because those 600 survivors would have all had extra wives from outside their tribes. Which means in Saul's day, he's not a pure-blooded Benjamite. He has a heritage that's mixed with somebody. That becomes important later. We'll talk about that more as we go. So he's right in talking about Benjamin as being a small tribe. But clearly, his family is important, because the text introduces him as a man of standing, and gives us a lengthy genealogy for him. But he's taking a page out of the Gideon playbook here. Then Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall, and seated them at the head of those who were invited, about 30 in number. Samuel said to the cook, bring the piece of meat I gave you, the one I told you to lay aside. So the cook took up the leg with what was on it, and set it in front of Saul. Samuel said, this is what has been kept for you. Eat, because it was set aside for you for this occasion, from the time I said I have invited guests. And Saul dined with Samuel that day. Now this is obviously one of those sacrifices that they could eat part of. If you go back to the beginning of Numbers and you read about their fellowship offering. This is some kind of offering, a fellowship offering or something, that they can eat then after they get done sacrificing it. Some of their sacrifices had to be burnt up entirely to God, but they got to eat parts of other sacrifices. The priest's share was the right thigh. Leviticus 7 verse 32. You are to give the right thigh of your fellowship offering to the priest as a contribution. Verse 34, from the fellowship offerings of the Israelites, I have taken the breast that is waved and the thigh that is presented, and have given them to Aaron the priest and his sons, as their regular. So this is probably the left leg, because the right leg was the priest's leg, but I don't know. At any rate, Samuel knew this was going to happen, and so he had this feast arranged ahead of time just for Saul, who didn't know it was going to happen until he got there. After they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul on the roof of his house. Now, remember, back in those days, their roofs were flat, and were actually just essentially extra rooms of their house. We don't think about that. Well, our rooms are not that way today. Our roofs are not that way today. When I want to have a conversation with somebody, I don't go put out on the roof to do it. In those days, they did. They rose about daybreak. I don't know what they're talking about. I guess Samuel was preparing Saul for his job as king. I don't know. They rose about daybreak, and Samuel called to Saul on the roof, get ready, and I will send you on your way. When Saul got ready, he and Samuel went outside together. As they were going down to the edge of town, Samuel said to Saul, tell the servant to go on ahead of us. And the servant did so. But you, he's still talking to Saul here, stay here a while, so I may give you a message from God. So apparently the conversation the night before was about all that was on Saul's mind, as Samuel said beforehand, before their meal. And now we're going to have the actual anointing. Then Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head and kissed him, saying, Has not the Lord anointed you leader over his inheritance? When you leave me today, there's an extra line. Okay, after that first sentence, there's an extra line here in the footnotes. So, has not the Lord anointed you over his people Israel? You will reign over the Lord's people and save them from the power of their enemies round about. And this will be a sign to you that the Lord has anointed you leader over his inheritance. There's an extra line in there in some of the copies of the scriptures. When you leave me today, you will meet two men near Rachel's tomb at Zelzah on the border of Benjamin. They will say to you, The donkeys you set out to look for have been found. And now your father has stopped thinking about them and is worried about you. He is asking, What shall I do about my son? Then you will go on from there into the, so saying that's one sign. So the prophet Samuel is telling Saul what's going to happen to him as he leaves. These are meant to be signs to Saul that God has, to confirm to him that God has anointed him as king. All that Saul has to go on now is the word of Samuel. And as we saw in the previous chapter, apparently Saul didn't even know who Samuel was. So Samuel's word may not mean much to Saul because he didn't know who Samuel was until today, or yesterday. So these signs, I think there's going to be 3 of them here, that Samuel is telling Saul he's going to see after he leaves him, are meant to confirm to Saul that what Samuel says is true, and that he really has been anointed as king. That's the first one. Second one is this. Then you, Saul, Samuel speaking to Saul again here, you will go on from there until you reach the great tree of Tabor. There, men going up to God at Bethel will meet you. 3 men going up to God at Bethel will meet you there. One will be carrying 3 young goats, another 3 loaves of bread, and another a skin of wine. So they're going to offer a grain offering, or this is a drink offering. This is the kind of stuff you bring to offer to God. They will greet you and will offer you 2 loaves of bread, which you will accept from them. That's sign number 2. Sign number 3. After that, you will go to Gibeah of God, where there is a Philistine outpost. As you approach the town, you will meet a procession of prophets coming down from the high place to another high place, with lyres, tambourines, flutes, and harps being played before them, and they will be prophesying. The Spirit of the Lord will come upon you in power, and you will prophesy with them, and you'll be changed into a different person. Once these signs are fulfilled, do whatever your hand finds to do, for God is with you. So this is a prediction of the future that the prophet Samuel is giving Saul, meant to be a confirmation to him, a sign, a confirmation to him that God is with him and has really anointed him king. Prophets do speak words about the future. That is part of what the prophets do. But they speak more than that. The mission of the prophet was essentially to speak the message of God. Sometimes, yes, that was a prediction of the future. Sometimes that prediction was conditional. If you do this, then that. If you don't do this, then that. If you do this, then that. If you don't do that, then this, basically. If one set of things happens, then this will come true. If another set of things happens, then this will come true. So sometimes those predictions were conditional. Sometimes they were not. And in this case, they're not. In this case, these predictions are strictly meant to be signs to Saul that the Lord really has anointed him as king. But they do speak much more than just offering predictions about the future. His last words to Saul here are, Go down ahead of me to Gilgal. I will surely come down to you to sacrifice burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. but you must wait 7 days until I come to you and tell you what you are to do. That's going to be kind of important later on.